Good afternoon and welcome to this InsideSales.com webinar, The Big Opportunity Media Companies Are Missing. We're fortunate enough to have Paul Marchant here today, the Industry Practice Lead for Media and Business Information. Whilst we're just waiting for the last few people to join, please watch this short video.
Henry decided that he wanted to win Le Mans. He set his sights on the most prestigious race, certainly in Europe at that particular time.
On 65, we struck out again, you know. The little Ferrari taxi cabs were there after midnight and all day long. The next day we were sitting on the sideline, so we had to eat crow again.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, The Big Opportunity That Media Companies Are Missing. My name is Paul Marchant, and I'm the Media Industry Practice Lead. In reality, that means I work with a plethora of media, business information, and events organizations to help support them in their efforts within the sales transformation space. Before we go any further, I just wanted to explain how this webinar is going to work this afternoon. Now that we have enough critical mass in terms of people logged on to view, we're going to get going, and we're going to take somewhere between 40 to 45 minutes. During the actual webinar itself, you guys are going to be on mute. So if you do have any questions, please enter them into the Q&A box as you think of them. And we are going to record the webinar, so I'll share details at the end around how you can access the content after the webinar's closed for today. So the content for this afternoon is obviously all around lead response management. Our starting point is going to be to level set our knowledge around what inbound marketing and lead response management actually are and why they matter. We're then going to look at the research program that we at Inside Sales undertook to understand what the media industry actually does today in terms of lead response. We're then going to understand what the output of that research was. And from a benchmarking perspective, we're going to compare and contrast that against the wider UK business population. I think then the critical section for me is where we're going to finish today, and that's really around high impact ideas that you can take away from this session, take back to your businesses that will take you from where you are today in terms of responding to leads to best in class or world class. So as I said, the first thing we're going to do today is just level set in terms of understanding and terminology. The B2B sales world, as we all by now know, has been hugely disrupted over the last 5 years. the adoption of, or the invention and adoption of the internet has transformed the insight and power that buyers have had or now have, and it's really disrupted the sales process. No longer are buyers sort of hostage to sales processes and sales folk. They can do an awful lot of their due diligence, their research before ever engaging a sales organization, and there's been a number of research pieces to support this transformation, the most famous of which originated in CEB. I'm sure many of you today will be familiar with that. Given that's the case, the sales disruption has also really impacted the lead generation processes of old. So the old kind of marketing lead kind of pipe gen processes of spray and pray marketing, cold calling are fundamentally dead. The days have gone from when they were effective. So as a result, there's been a real shift in how organizations go to market and build pipeline in the B2B arena. Look, the first key trend is inbound marketing. So organizations are starting to build lots and lots of very interesting content in an attempt to engage the buyer and keep them in a conversation so that they are ready to engage with the vending organization and talk to them at the right point in the sales cycle when they're ready to start that purchase conversation. So all about keeping the conversation going until they're ready to talk to you, and facilitated by great content. That's one half of the inbound marketing programs. The second half is the technology enablers, and what this rise in inbound marketing has also seen is a huge rise in the marketing automation technologies that underpin this content-led marketing programs. In fact, the inbound marketing world has become so large that Gartner reckon the market to be worth something like $3 billion in terms of spend. And they also reckon that on average there's 49% of companies are actually using marketing automation technology today. So it's big, it's important, and it's been built as a response to this disrupted sales landscape that we all experience. Now, given the rise of inbound marketing, how you actually respond to the leads that are generated from those processes become business critical. I think we all fundamentally, intuitively understand that you need to reach out quickly and respond quickly and professionally to new prospects. But actually, when you think about it and look at the data points again, it becomes even more critical in terms of how you manage these leads. An average lead costs somewhere between $30 to $50, for example. If you're running a volume business and have a volume of leads, if you're not capitalizing on the leads that are responding, then $30 to $50 is suddenly a very large expense. The other data point I find fascinating is that the data says 78% of sales go to the first company to respond to a lead or a prospect. So it's critical in whatever way you look at it, whether it's instinctively thought about or whether you look at it from a data, it's important. But actually, as an industry, there was no real data around what best practice looked like to respond to these inbound leads. And so probably about 9-10 years ago, in fact 2007, Inside Sales decided to team up with Harvard, MIT and Dr. James Oldroyd to run a research project. And that primary goal of that research project was to understand, if we want the best results from an inbound marketing program, how should you respond to leads? This program looked at 3 years worth of data. It looked at 15,000 leads in terms of a data set and somewhere in the region of 100,000 contact attempts, and started to draw conclusions in terms of best practice. And the first thing the study examined was immediacy, i.e. how quickly should companies actually respond or make first contact with an inbound lead? The answer is immediacy matters. The research found that if you're able to contact a lead within 5 minutes of that inbound inquiry being submitted, you're up to 100 times greater chance of being able to actually get hold of that lead. Not only that, but if you are able to hit that 5-minute deadline, the odds of actually qualifying a lead go through the roof as well. In fact, there was 21 times increase in terms of lead conversion when you made contact that quickly. And it makes sense, you know, that's obviously the data, but when you think about it from a real world perspective, if somebody has submitted a web form on your website and they're sat there at their desk, they're far more likely to be contactable than they would be on their mobile, you know, an hour later as they're buying their lunch. And secondly, they're into your content. You know, they're sat there, they're purposely digesting your content, and they've asked for a contact. So common sense dictates that if you're able to catch them at that point in time when they're focused on you and your proposition, that you're going to have a more meaningful conversation and be able to increase the chances of conversion. So speed matters. The second thing that he looked at was how many times a company should attempt to contact a lead after that inbound inquiry. Again, the research found that persistence also really matters. The data pointed to the fact that if a sales rep makes between 6 to 9 call attempts or contact attempts, they then have they maximize the chance of being able to reach that contact or that lead. Sadly, an average rep in the UK today only tries 1.5 times on average. That's what our data shows us. So there's a big disconnect between what happens today, which in my mind equals drive-by selling, and what should happen, which is that 6 to 9 contact attempts cadence. Best case from our perspective is that those calls and those contacts should be spread over a 2-week period. And fundamentally, if you vary the contact method, so phone attempts, voicemail, and email, that maximizes the chance of contacting that prospect. Now we understand what best practice looks like per se, it's time to turn our attention to the media sector and have a look at what we found the sector, or how the sector performs against those best practice benchmarks. So what do we do to understand how the media sector responds? Well, the first thing we did, or the first thing to be aware of, is that Inside Sales has a piece of technology that is able to mimic behavior of a person online. In that technology, we then basically secret shop websites. So we use a number of aliases, and we then go and actually look at companies' websites and find contact request forms, so web forms. We fill that out using the alias information, and then obviously we submit the request. We then sit back and wait and ultimately record all of the call attempts, email messages, voicemails that follow on from that contact request for a period of 2 weeks. So what did we do? Well, in terms of the media research, we looked at 70 different media organizations, and they were broadly split into business information, events business, publishers, job boards. And over the course of March and April, in the 6-week period, we polled those websites and asked for a sales interaction. Now, the sales interactions obviously varied. In some cases, we wanted to advertise. In other cases, we wanted to be a sponsor or an exhibitor. But fundamentally, the call to action was we wanted to contact from the organization's sales teams. It's important to note that we were fair in terms of when we contacted the organizations through the web. We only used business hours. We allowed for time zones. I think, as I said, everybody was allowed a 2-week period to respond. And at the end of that process, we summarized all of the responses that we found and aggregated those across the media sector to be able to then deliver the research. When you look at the first outcome of the research, the striking thing is that actually only 62% of all the organizations actually responded to our request. So, that leaves just under 40% of organizations that had no follow-up at all. And that follow-up could have been by phone, voicemail, or email. So, summary, roughly 2/3 followed up, 1/3 didn't. We then looked at the immediacy. So as we said before, how quickly companies actually made their first contact attempt after our request. Firstly, you can see from the data that the overall number of, or proportion of phone responses was abysmally low, really, really poor in my perspective. So under 20% of organizations actually even bothered to respond using the phone to our request for contact. So pretty poor. When you then look at the data and look at the speed of response of those organizations that bothered, you can see the speed of response was somewhere around 12 hours, so 11 hours, 40 minutes to be precise, compared to the best practice of 5 minutes that we were talking about a moment ago. You can see that that really, really is disappointing again. So not many organizations responded by phone. When they did, they were typically slow. Having said that, this is obviously an aggregation of the results, and there were some exceptions to the rule. And in fact, when you look at the fastest respondent, they came in at a time of about 11 minutes. So some elements of good performance amongst an average of very poor performance. When you dig into the email response data, you can see that there was a far higher proportion of organizations that actually responded via email to our web form submission, somewhere in the region of 60%, if my mental math doesn't prove me wrong. Yep. And the contrast against the phone response is obviously far higher proportion of responses. However, a number of those were auto email responses. So if an organization responded sub 10 seconds to our web form request via email, then we made the assumption that that was an email response that was automated. So not hugely impressive overall, I guess you would agree, in that the ability to automate email responses means you should be looking at least 100% there from an email response. And again, when you look at the immediacy of those email responses, you can see that the average response time was actually 36 hours. So that's 3 days after the request for contact. So very, very, very slow, and nowhere near that best practice of sub 5 minutes. When you look at the persistence of the media sector, the numbers also look very interesting. You can see, firstly, the overall population of organizations that made a response at all was that 62% number as we combined both the email and the phone responses. You can then see that the average response attempts from a persistence perspective across all the different media, so that's phone, email, voicemail, was about 1.8 attempts. You break that down into phone, and that drops, and you can see there was actually on average 1 phone follow-up attempted across the population, under 1 voicemail attempt per organization, and 1.3 email attempts. So overall, it seems we're hiding via email, we're not making enough phone calls, we're certainly not leaving voicemails, and 1.8 as an average number of attempts is far, far below that average that we talked about before of best practice at being 6 to 9 attempts. So, summary is we really do seem to be wasting the opportunity here to actually make contact and, practicing that drive-by selling that I alluded to before. When you look at the UK average in, I think I said to you, the current average is about 1.5 attempts, which is, also very poor, but slightly worse than the media sector. If you contrast that against the UK average in 2015, at that point it was 2.39 attempts. So, the UK as a wider business population has got a lot of work to do and seems to be getting worse. And really, the media sector doesn't cover itself in any glory. So what do we conclude from this study? Well, I think that the first conclusion has got to be that the actual overall response rate is really, really poor. 62%, and if you break that down into phone response, sub 20%, it's hugely disappointing. Overall, the response rate or the persistence is slightly better than the current UK average, but again, nowhere near best practice. And when you look at the speed of response, be that by phone or email, we're measuring it in days pretty much, not minutes. We're saying sub 5 minutes, and to be measuring it at 11 hours or 36 hours for phone and email respectively, it's just too slow. It really is. When you look at the highest performing subsector within the industry, it was actually job boards. And I guess that was kind of interesting to reflect on why that might be. I mean, from my own personal experience, I would suggest that the job board as a media space are slightly ahead of the broader media sector in terms of digitizing its business model and its sales organization. So, one suspects that there's a maturity there that may not be present in other sectors. But I guess, whatever way you look at it, the results are poor, and really it's surprising that organizations are just not capitalizing on this low-hanging fruit of inbound leads, not least when organizations are spending money, precious marketing dollars and euros on both content and technology to support it. But, and I think this is the biggest thing to say from the whole survey, as the bar is so low, there really is a huge opportunity here for media sector organizations to grab the bull by the horns and turn this current poor performance into a real competitive advantage. For those that are prepared to change, there really is a very significant opportunity here. Leads me neatly on to the next section, and the point to this webinar, or this element of the webinar, I should say, is that we want to give you 5 high-impact techniques that you can take away in the area of response management so that you can go and translate the current performance of your organization into that best practice performance and really grab the competitive advantage that we've seen now exists for those that are willing to adopt. That's the first thing, sales and marketing alignment. Well, this is a topic that we're probably all very familiar with. Whichever side of the fence you sit on, there's been much talk and, to be frank, grumbling over the years around how difficult it seems to be to get sales and marketing to actually work together. From our perspective, if you're going to leverage this opportunity that exists around inbound leads and basically contributing to the pipeline through that inbound marketing process, you need to get your sales and marketing teams aligned and on point. How do we suggest you do that? Well, first thing is joint process design. There's no way you'll ever make these best practice benchmarks for lead response management if you don't have your processes jointly designed through sales and marketing with the right handoffs. It really does need to be an Olympic relay baton handover. The second thing to say is you should have SLAs in place, and those SLAs should be jointly agreed again. Personally, with my experience of that is within inside sales as an organization, our SLAs are built around those best practice metrics. Our teams are basically set up to meet that 5-minute SLA in terms of best practice speed of response. And the other thing to say is when you're designing these processes and SLAs, you really should think about it from the data perspective, which is speed and persistence, and not necessarily how you work today. We've seen a number of customers we've worked with that have tried to design new processes, but fundamentally, their current rules of engagement around leads and accounts have got into the way and not allowed them to design that optimal process to maximize the conversion and contact rate for inbound leads. So fundamentally disregard what you've got today and think about it from a customer's perspective in terms of that speed and persistence approach. The other thing to say from an SLA and process perspective is you can vary that dependent on the web activity. So you might react differently and with a different process and a different speed if someone's on your pricing page as contrasting that against someone that was on a more generic piece of content. Certainly, again, within our internal inside sales processes. If somebody is on a pricing page, the SLA to actually make contact with them is far, far quicker than it is for a more generic web interaction. The second thing to take away in these high impact techniques is specialism. Now, specialism matters for a number of reasons. You can see here the graphic is kind of showing a general kind of sales organization with different functions, broken down into specialism, sales account management. Within the sales function, you can then see the lead generation role. And the critical piece here, as you can see highlighted beneath that, is within lead generation, when we're talking about specialism in roles, we're talking about specializing in terms of inbound or outbound lead management or prospecting. And the bottom line is to really gear yourselves up to hit that 5-minute SLA in terms of contact, you should try and have an inbound lead generation, lead development function whose sole purpose is just there to be able to respond quickly to inbound leads, poised and ready to go. And if you are able to do that, hitting those best practice guidelines, in terms of managing these becomes far, far simpler. It also allows you to make sure that team that are specialized in managing inbound leads are able to be up to date on the current demand gen campaigns, the marketing messages, and it just reinforces the alignment between sales and marketing we were talking about in the first technique. So some organizations actually take that a step further, and in many organizations we're starting to see inbound lead generation actually report outside of sales and directly into marketing. That way there is an accountability, a clear accountability for responding, reacting to leads in a timely fashion, and it also really helps that alignment between the marketing messages and demand gen campaigns and the people that are actually responding to the output of those, i.e. the inbound lead development team. So the third high impact technique is around driving behaviors that enforce or prescribe the correct contact cadence. If you remember when we were talking about persistency, the best practice is a 6 to 9 attempts at contacting a lead or a prospect. And really here, what we're seeing is that to be able to actually manage to do that, organizations that are best in class are actually enforcing that. So they're putting in place processes that are dictated to either through the CRM or through other tools like Inside Sales that are basically driving that correct contact cadence. So a sales rep actually follows the right point in time to make the first dial, the second dial, and more importantly, it actually not just determines the persistence model, but it actually puts a timeline, overlays a timeline process on top of that. So, there's no point calling a lead 6 to 9 times in the first 10 minutes. All you're going to do is annoy them immensely. So actually, organizations that are doing this well are determining what they look at over, from a timeline perspective, and quite often kind of 10 days, 2-week period, and then they're driving those correct contacts at the appropriate time over that period. And those contacts, it's important to say, are not just calls. So you can see from the graphic here a representation of something that we use ourselves internally. So there's a combination of dials, voicemails, and emails spread over that period. And in our case, we do that over 10 days. And it's important to say as well that once the 10-day period or 2-week period is up, actually you need to rest. You need to give your lead a chance to recover from the contact. So, best practice says leave it for 6 months maybe before you then come back again. But as I say, summary, third high impact technique is all around making sure you prescribe that correct contact cadence. The fourth key takeaway from these high impact techniques is all around your technology backbone. And it's true to say that if you want to be able to give your teams the best chance of success in meeting these best practice guidelines, you really need to integrate your technology. And you need to integrate that in a number of different ways. First and foremost, you need to have an integration point between your marketing automation platform and your CRM system. Or if you don't have a marketing automation system, your website, your web forms that prospects are interacting with in your CRM. And really what you need is a real-time feed so that when somebody's interacting with your website or your marketing automation platform, there's immediately a real-time integration into your CRM system that then creates some form of notification or some sort of outcome. Typically, that's the creation of a lead within your system. Without that, you're setting yourself up for real challenges. We see organizations that try to use email as a means of disseminating alerts for new leads from web forms, and email gets lost. So we would always say integrate into your CRM system. Secondly, the inbound alerts or notifications need to be integrated into wherever your sales reps are working. We've just said email as a prime example is something that notifications of new leads or the need to call a prospect is not optimal because of just the volume that comes into an inbox would get lost. The same challenge exists in terms of getting lost if you're not delivering these notifications into the working platforms and systems and processes of your sales folk. So you have to make sure that these precious inbound leads, when they arrive, there's a means of the sales reps being informed in a very logical way, in a timely way, but critically in a way that is easy for them to consume. So wherever they're working, that's where the notifications need to be. The final piece of integration that we see as being business critical is integrating your CRM system and your phone system. In best practice organizations, what you see is a telephony integration into the CRM that allows you to actually route these leads or these prospects that have hit your website into their phone queue. So, by allowing that integration between the telephony and CRM, you can actually have a system that pops up to your reps that says, there's somebody on your website, here's the phone number, do you want to call them now? And that means you're able to start to route the calls in a very logical fashion as well. So you can use your CRM data to disseminate these notifications or these calls that need to be made, not just very quickly, but logically to the right rep or to the right group of reps. So in summary, marketing automation website into your CRM, notifications need to be integrated into the workflow or the tools that the sales reps are actually using day to day, and then integrating your CRM with your telephony tools allows you to be far cleverer in how you route calls and how you make the notifications far more logical for sales reps to consume. If you get all that right, you can actually get to some very, very impressive results. I'm going to use inside sales as an example, purely because when as a data point, when you look at our average response time, it's actually sub 20 seconds for someone hitting a web response. And that's not because we're doing anything magical, but it's because we've looked at all the things we've talked about already, and particularly in the case of the technology, we've integrated all of the platforms that I've just talked to you about so that the process is slick and the reps are enabled and ready to go. The final thing to ensure that you actually meet these best practice KPIs is all around monitoring and measuring. And we've heard this many times before, but without measuring, you're never actually going to know whether or not you're adhering to your guidelines, your SLAs. And the way that you monitor and measure needs to be thought about. Depending on what platforms you've got, will determine how you do it. But if we take the example of having a CRM system and either a web form or marketing automation system, then you need to firstly and foremost capture all those inbound leads and the call data within your CRM. That way, you'll be able to measure what arrived, when it arrived, how quickly you responded to it. And obviously that gives you the view of how you're complying or how you're achieving those best practice guidelines. Secondly, KPI your reps on it. So here at Inside Sales again, our inbound lead development team have SLAs that are sub 5 minutes for the response to inbound leads. You make it part of their KPIs, you pay them on it, and strangely enough, it becomes part of the mindset. On top of that, actually, you can take it a stage further. You can actually drive motivation, not just from a kind of a KPI and SLA perspective, but we see some organizations try and gamify the process. So actually create a bit of a competition out of it within that inbound lead development team, so you can see as a rep how quickly you're managing to respond to the leads that get allocated to you versus your peers. That itself can be a great tool to drive that kind of that mindset and behavior. And finally, you can always then benchmark what you measured internally with what's measured externally. So some of our customers actually come to us and look to take this kind of response audit process that we use as the basis for the industry research as an external service, so that at a period agreed with them, it could be daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever period. We go and mystery shop, and we ping the web forms. And we benchmark and we respond, and then we share that data back with them so that they're able to, benchmark how different teams are performing, how different websites are being supported, and it's just giving them an external perspective. However you do it, whether it's internally, externally, or a combination of the two, critically you need to do this. Without doing this, you're not going to know whether or not you're actually achieving. And secondly, you're also not going to be able to adjust your processes to kind of iterate and improve and get you to the point where you are that best-in-class organization, because nobody starts there in the beginning. So I wanted to just draw a conclusion around today's webinar and summarize what I see as the key takeaways. So we talked about the basis of what inbound lead response management is. We then talked about what best practice looks like, and critically respond in under 5 minutes, respond through a mixture of phone, email, and voicemail. Make sure you're persistent in following up with a contact cadence of somewhere between 6 to 9 attempts. Space that over a couple of 2 weeks, and then you've got best practice nailed. We looked at how the media sector compared to best practice, and I think the reality is self-apparent. Wasn't a good enough percentage of responses, was a very slow response, be that by phone or email when a response was actually made, and the persistence levels were very disappointing. But, and the big but being, there's a great opportunity for those that actually want to capitalize on that and turn it into a competitive advantage. We then looked at the 5 high impact techniques of aligning sales and marketing, specializing in your business development team, imposing or enforcing a contact strategy or cadence, integrating your technology platforms, and monitoring and measuring both internally and or externally.
Seems you might have had a problem with the audio there. Sorry about the garbled ending, but I hope you all took something away from the content this afternoon. I guess it's probably a chance to just see if there's any questions. Alex, have you got any questions come through?
Yes, we have. We've had a few. I guess we'll dive straight in. So the first one is, how does the media sector compare with other industries?
So it's a really interesting question. I guess it depends, firstly, by what you mean, or what you're hoping to compare. But we ran a survey, a global survey across all industry sectors in Q4 last year, where we looked at about 4,000 different businesses, and we did start to segment and make some comparisons between different sectors. And when you looked at the speed of response, media was pretty much in the middle, so kind of fairly average. You couldn't really kind of call out any particular I guess, achievements in being quick or being particularly slow. From a persistency perspective, media again was somewhere in the mean, but actually slightly, it's probably just sort of erring towards the bottom half of the industry performers. And out of interest, the quickest industry to respond was transportation, and the most persistent industry in terms of responses was actually education.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Paul. Next question is, how should I determine the best contact strategies or cadences for my business?
So the first obvious thing to say is that it does need to be a business-specific set of contact strategies, and note the fact I would say strategies. I don't think there is just one strategy. Actually, you should be looking at trying to segment the leads or the accounts that you're working and have appropriate contact strategies for them. For example, if you've got high-value leads, you probably want to be more persistent with those than you would with the sort of tire-kicking leads. But nevertheless, the sort of things you could think about were, what is your sales model? Is it a sort of transactional, high-volume sales model, or is it a kind of more account-based relational model? Is your team managing inbound or outbound leads? Are you, are you culturally a sort of passive or assertive sales organisation, and what's the audience like? And I guess ultimately, what are the mediums that you're going to use to try and touch these leads? Is it phone, phone voicemail, email, social, etc.? So kind of, there's a whole lot to consider. And I think there is a starting point. From our perspective, our Inside Sales Labs, our research team, recommend the starting point is a 3x3x3x3 strategy, which simply means over a 10-day period, make 3 phone calls, leave 3 voicemails, send 3 emails, and provide 3 social interactions. And if you kind of take that as a starter for 10, and then ultimately measure the effectiveness. If you're using tools out there in the market, you can actually see that what the contact rates are with different contact strategies and adjust accordingly to your business.
Okay, great. I think we've got time for one more. So this one is, so where do you see the lead gen sales development team sitting in the organisation? Where do you see them reporting to? Is it kind of sales or marketing?
It's a real blend, and again, it obviously varies organisation by organisation, and actually to a degree industry by industry. But we tend to see a trend around, is it outbound lead development or inbound? And that tends to be the thing that is the biggest driver in terms of the reporting line. If it's an inbound lead development function, more typically you see them reporting to marketing, and the obvious reason for that is that it means they're then aligned with the marketing messages, they're aware of the campaigns that are going out the door, and it makes for a more seamless experience. And it also means that they're poised and ready to react to and maximise the return on the marketing campaign expenditure. If it's outbound, you more often see that reporting to sales leadership or sales function. There's less dependence on the leads that are coming in. There's less necessity to be so aligned to individual campaigns. And you also see outbound sales organisations as kind of big talent farms or talent pools for field and inside sales organisations. So that would be the kind of the generalisation. Overall, I think the split from a personal perspective is probably slightly weighted to sales, maybe 70-30 in terms of reporting line.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Paul. There have been a few questions that we can't actually cover off today, but we'll follow up directly with those people who have asked those questions. This webinar will be available on demand should you wish to go back and watch it again or forward it on to a colleague. So that will be available on our website within the next 24 hours. That will be on the resources section. So thank you very much for attending, everyone, and we'll hopefully see you next time.